Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFAL York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the sixth session of the 2024 Emergency Management in Hospitals and Healthcare Speaker Series, which is being presented in partnership with the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center. I will begin today's session with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Takaranto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event and our participants may be joining from various locations, I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speakers, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Misha Richard. Misha Richard is the current Emergency Preparedness Lead for the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. In this role, she acts as a subject matter expert assisting with the development and maintenance of emergency management governance, training materials, and exercises. Misha also volunteers as an editor for the Canadian Journal of Emergency Management and is happy to be a collaborator and facilitator for the CFA York series. She holds a Master of Disaster and Emergency Management degree from York University and bachelor's degrees from Western University and Brandon University in the focus areas of political science and disaster studies. Misha, thank you very much for moderating today's session and your ongoing support organizing this series. The floor is yours.
Excellent. Hello, and thank you for that introduction, Francesco. I'm lucky enough to introduce our first speakers that we've had coming to us from the West Coast. So very grateful, especially given the time change, for having Shaun and Paul with us. So I get to do an introduction for them, and then I'll touch on a little bit of housekeeping before we really get underway here. So I'll start by introducing Shaun O'Mara. So thank you so much for joining us today. Shaun is a veteran of the Canadian and British military, also Ministry of Forestries and Surrey Fire Services. He's a solutions-focused doer who enjoys novel problem solving and tackles challenges with energy, skill, and innate charismatic communication. He holds a master's degree in disaster and emergency management and an MBA. Shaun's acute appreciation for the humanity of any situation forges relationships across boundaries, inviting those across literal or organizational cultures to see what unites us. He's also the founder of the Canadian Veterans Portrait Project, which I encourage you to check out on your own time, and the originator of the Island Health Facilities Emergency Management Program. I won't list all the countries he's worked in, but I will say that he has worked in 17 countries and 4 continents. We'll see if that number's grown since I got this update. Shaun lives near the water in Esquimalt, from where he will reluctantly leave the beautiful island to go to the ends of the earth for great food and wine on 2 wheels. Now I can introduce Paul. So Paul Wechselberger, is an emergency manager and business continuity professional with years of experience stretching back to the aftermath of the Fort McMurray wildfire. The bulk of his emergency management experience is on large infrastructure projects, including dams, water distribution and treatment, and public alerting and tsunami sirens. Paul's experience stretches from Canada to Australia in both the public and private sectors. Paul also lives in the Cowichan Valley with his wife, his 2 dogs, and a growing number of farm animals that I'd love to hear more about. But a little bit of housekeeping, as I mentioned before I turn the microphone over to Shaun and Paul, is for those of you that haven't joined any of these sessions previously, I'll give you the rundown that we've got our Q&A open for questions that you would like targeted specifically to our guest speakers today. If you would like to just chat amongst yourselves, if you'd like to get some different feedback from your peers or to just raise additional comments, please feel free to put those in the chat, which is also open. But again, targeted questions, put those in the Q&A. I'll do my best to moderate that and raise them to Shaun and Paul as we go throughout the presentation if there's appropriate breaks. And if not, we do have our dedicated Q&A time at the end of the presentation. So again, thank you to Shaun and Paul for joining us all the way from beautiful BC today to share with us. I turn the floor over to you both.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you very much. It's
great to be here. See some familiar faces in the participant list. So a big shout out to some former colleagues that I can recognize, and thank you everyone for joining us from what looks like around the world, Canada and States. It's a pleasure to be speaking, and let's get into it. Is my screen being shared there, Francesco? Give me
No, not seeing it yet.
can you throw it up there? And
No, I'm not able to
yeah,
control that. Yeah,
is that
there
working
we go.
now?
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
Looks
We
good.
got you.
We're in business.
Thank goodness. You would think after all this Zoom experience, I still don't have a panic attack over all the screens working, yet I do. Thank you to Paul. Welcome, everyone, to our brief talk on the Facilities Emergency Management Program. I'll explain what we're going to review. So we're going to talk about the island first, then island health, talk about our hospital system here, the way we do things, the facilities emergency management concept of operations, the thing that occupies most of our time right now, which is talking about water in all its forms and the outage risk. And then we're going to talk about Christchurch, New Zealand, and we're going to talk about the fact that we don't have to learn all the hard lessons ourselves, our planning for such incidents, how they differ between small, medium, and large hospitals. We're going to address a common notion about water trucking, and then we're going to offer a successful project we've completed here, which we just call the hydrant bypass project, because it's a very simple, cheap, and effective method to keep things going. So we are Island Health. You can see the stats there. I recently did a DRI course with a lot of American counterparts, and like I said to some people earlier, I thought by the end of the course, people thought I was literally some version of Gilligan on a tiny island using coconut husks and bamboo to treat people in a hut somewhere. Maybe we're not that far off that, but to orientate you, I am just a little bit north of Seattle, a little bit west of Vancouver. There's not further west you can go much on our continent. And our island is a very wild and beautiful place. It has survived initially on fishing, logging, mining, and of course, tourism. We have some famous places like Tofino, you may know about. That place gets occasionally a very famous visitor. And of course, we have our indigenous population who've been here since time immemorial, stewarding this unbelievable place. So we service just shy of 1 million people. And to do so, our organization has almost 30,000 employees on this island. And just to orientate you to what we do in this program, all of us, all two of us, we have a partner agency, HEMBC, which thankfully helps us with all things clinical, but we do facilities, we do the bricks and mortar. And our logo you can see in the upper right hand corner of each slide. The base of the pyramid, the darkest blue, is the hospital. This is what we consider FMO. So that's facilities, maintenance, and operations. We like to consider ourselves the base of the pyramid. Without this base, our clinical partners have no place to deliver their care. We provide them a place to do their job. Going up the pyramid, we have all the service people, all the technicians, all the people that make this stuff work. Further up, we have the stars of the show, our medicos, our doctors and nurses, and at the top we have our community. That's what we're here for. Behind our triangle, quintessentially, we have a wave. We are surrounded by water. I call myself a water evangelist in the emergency management space, and that's how we represent ourselves. So, because we do facilities, because we do bricks and mortar, we are the stuff. This is where the rubber hits the road. We do critical infrastructure and business continuity planning. So what is that? How do we keep the place open? How do we keep the lights on? How do we keep the water running? How do we provide the place for care to happen? So you can imagine, especially on an island and isolated communities, we are the ultimate critical infrastructure. We do emergency planning with our partners, and we focus on mitigation, not necessarily just how we'll respond and how we should prepare for that, but what should we build in advance of an emergency? What should we be creating, engineering, putting in place, trying to peer into the future, seeing what's coming at us, and trying to get ready for it. So we do operational every day. Our life is operational. How do these things work so that the whole system can continue to function? But when we go into emergency mode, we're tactical. We let other people deal with the largest part of the picture, and we try and focus our efforts on where our horsepower is best spent. We have the plumbers, the electricians, the carpenters, the power engineers. These are people who have often grown up with the campuses. A guy is retiring today whose father opened up Royal Jubilee Hospital, where I sit now, on just on the outskirts of Victoria, and he became a electrician the day he was eligible to do so. And he too, for a second full generation, has worked here his entire career. You can imagine the invaluable repository of information these guys provide to us. So we separate ourselves from the greater EOC. Usually, Paul and I am the conduit or the translator or the message runner, and we leave our people to do what they are best at to get things that are stuck unstuck. Now, since this program has been stopped just over a year ago, while we feel we may have been screaming into a hurricane about all the things that aren't quite right or aren't as we would prefer, people are starting to listen, and they start to ask questions such as, well, if this is a problem there and we're building another one of them, isn't it going to be a problem again? The answer is yes. So the people who are building our new hospitals, our new places, are starting to engage with us, and they're starting to ask us in advance, how can we get ahead of these problems so we don't have to do the disruptive, expensive, clunky retrofits that we're doing and consulting on. So that's how FMO fits in Island Health. So I am a water evangelist. My scripture is water outage planning. There's lots of different things that can come at us. In the hospitals, we have baked into our DNA, I don't even know how, we always consider energy resilience, electricity. So at this hospital, we have 2 generators. One of them, just one of them, could power everything business as usual up to 95%. Every time we build, we have in our mind that what should we do if the lights go out? And that's an important question. It's a good first question, but we haven't answered a lot of follow-on questions about, yes, we can keep the lights on, but what do we do if we can't keep the taps running? So that's why water has become such a central focus for us here. So I know normally you turn the tap and water magically appears, much like the light switch. However, we have to consider problems from the beginning to the end of that chain. So here we talk about, what if we have a problem at source, where the water comes from, if it's contaminated, if there's a wildfire, if there's a mudslide, if there's increased turbidity. Then after we have all these problems of source, which are very big and forces of nature we have to deal with, we talk about transmission. How does that water get to us? This is extremely complex, complicated, highly engineered, high pressured, buried, expensive infrastructure. And it's absolutely vital to life. The next thing we have to think about is how that water gets to our infrastructure inside our hospitals, inside our campus. How is it used? So these are the 3 problem sets we're always trying to address. And one of the things that's really come into focus this year is a climactic problem. What are we going to do about drought? We're facing a problem here on the island that has been growing in the last few years, but is really starting to take off as a serious threat to us. And we don't have solutions to solve climate change, but we're trying to create solutions where we can deliver our core mandate of providing care by keeping our facilities up and running. And I can tell you that we have kicked this idea back and forth, and we think we've come to really where all these roads lead to. We've tried repurposing RO water. We've tried getting water from alternate sources. We've thought of pretty much every which way you can do it. And I can tell you, if you're attempting to solve this problem for yourself, you will go down many, many roads, and you will find that you're arriving at a very familiar destination. You have to have a seismically resilient, large amount of stored on-site water, which is ready to go when the problem arises. So we bear a lot of similarities to Christchurch, New Zealand. We have monuments that even look the same. We have similar demographics. And we can go through all the problems that happened with the earthquake in Christchurch. But here's what I want you to consider as you read some of the parts of this slide. This has happened. This is real. It's true. It's history. You don't have to doubt it. You can read the stories of heroism and tragedy. The main point is we don't have to necessarily suffer these things ourselves to learn the lesson. So one of the things that Christchurch did is they anticipated the need for water, and they tried to solve it in various ways. Not all of them worked. One of them was to store water high on the roof or in parkades. Well, when the shake came, those were the first structures to fail, and the fact that that stored water, which could have saved people, then flooded places, was the reason for the immediate evacuation. Then as the story goes further and further into the timeline, you find that we found ways to deal with the dark. We did not find a good way to deal with the fact we didn't have water. And in the end, people were evacuated. They had to leave a place where they could have got good care and had their suffering reduced, but they weren't able to stay because they didn't have water. So another thing I want us to think about is uh, another incident has happened almost locally to us in the next province over, in Calgary. The unthinkable happened. A major water main broke, and it interrupted water service to a major city by Canadian standards for days and days, bordering on weeks. And the idea was, because that had never happened in people's memory, it had never happened. Water always works. The assumption was that it will always work. And the proof is all around us that something like that could happen to us. And the climate change is a further reminder that we have to address this problem. And there are sometimes the expense, the difficulty provides obstacles to how we do so.
All right. Thank you, Shaun. As we move along, I want to talk a little bit about some of the steps we've taken for our water outage planning. Who the key partners are. Some of you may be far down the road compared to us at Island Health, and some of you may be looking at your hospital systems and wondering what to do next. So we put out a bit of a roadmap, and it's going to end in 2 projects that we feel are quite scalable. We'll be installing 500,000 liter tanks at our facilities, the major hospitals. We'll go into a little bit of that later, but all roads lead to stored on-site potable water that will be resilient when you need it. So there's 3 categories to look at when you're doing your water planning, and it starts off at the local water purveyor level. So it's your municipal water provider, your regional district, or your improvement district, so a little bit more rural systems, or perhaps your facility is on an owned or shared aquifer, and you're doing all of your water yourself, or even hauling water in some of our cases. The first stop is check your water bill and figure out how much water that you use, and then reverse engineer to figure out how much water you need. Some of the administrative challenges we found out were getting that information, and aggregating it and turning it into usable data. But the first stop is the local water purveyor. The next one is your local government. The local government is the cavalry. They should have the different response mechanisms in place, but may not be as resilient as you'd like it to be. So often your local government and your water purveyor will be the same agency. So for Shaun and I, we started working closely with both the water purveyor and the local government, about 90 of them in Vancouver Island that we had to work with. Sometimes they were the same, sometimes they were different, sometimes they were shared, to manage expectations. If the water goes out, what can we expect you to do? And how resilient do our specific sites need to be? And the answer was different across the board, which changed some of our water planning at a site level, but really at an aggregated level, these are our first two partners. And then the final one is our regional provincial agencies. So Shaun mentioned we have Health Emergency Management BC, that stand up the OC, and they arrive when things are really looking bleak. And we're able to work with them as well as the Emergency Management Agency for the province, and figuring out what type of higher level provincial or regional resources are available, and understanding that those often have a lead time that we would find unacceptable to our acute sites. At the top of the screen here, I do have a picture of a helicopter with water, and that is what we would like to think that we will receive. But I can assure you that if it could happen, it would not be enough. And when you need it, it won't be there. So I would cross that out of your imagination, or more importantly, your executive's imagination, that such services will be available the second that you need it. So the next slide here is to talk a little bit about one of the local water providers and regional governments in southern Vancouver Island in the Victoria area, the Capital Regional District. This is a world-class water system serving over 400 residents and 13 municipalities. They have a fantastic emergency response plan. They have many of the features that Calgary was missing, such as spare parts, 12 kilometers of pipe, all the critical hard to get pieces. They have portable water labs, portable distribution, trailers. You can see on the bottom right hand corner the children have collected their water in bags and will return home to boil their noodles and rice while we wait for the system to be restored. They've got deployable pump stations, overland bypass kits. They've got it figured out, but they cannot guarantee that this robust system that you see on the map here will be deployed fast enough for our hospitals. So the message that we have taken, despite having world-class partners in emergency response for post-disaster, our hospitals need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet for up to 72 hours when it comes to water resiliency. So to get into it, we really categorize our hospitals into two groups, small and rural and large and urban. And they each have some unique features, but at the bottom you can see our strategies are to store water, recharge the system, conserve the water on site, and then coordinate the resources. Conserve water speaks for itself, and I won't really be getting into the clinical side of it, because for Shaun and I, a lot of what we do is make sure that we can deliver water. The conservation of it is a whole nother presentation side of it, and we won't go there. And the coordination of resources, everyone in this call is experienced in emergency management will understand the concept of an EOC. So we really focused on the store water and the recharge of the water. So the advantages for small and rural, and you can see this in Wainwright, Alberta, which is near Calgary, that Shaun mentioned, and they had their water outage. They were able to truck water to a small hospital. The demand can be between 5,000 and 100,000 liters a day. It's a very manageable amount of water to put in a truck and coordinate a strike team of trucks to replenish the system. So then we also have some advantages in the smaller rural, is they often have less funding, or they are forced to be by nature more resilient. So we have less administrative hoops for those small facilities to get back online faster. Where in the city, we have a lot more specialization, and it does slow things down. And the final one is those places are often used to playing second fiddle to the big hospitals. and they're prepared to make those changes in-house. It's a lot easier. So small and rural, the key thing is it's something that we can keep online with water trucking, which is the easy button, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But the key thing to remember about small, rural, big and large is you need a vessel. You need a tank to receive the water in that the trucks can place it in. It has to be prepared with its backflow preventers, potable membrane to ensure that the water that we do place in, wherever we get it from, will be functional, will be safe for the people to drink. Switching over to the large sites, and these are the more challenging sites to really think about emergency water, is the 500,000 liters is, in theory, almost impossible. Not impossible, but it's a very challenging amount of water to imagine trucking slowly, tank by tank to refill. So we've got a big water trucking isn't an option. So we are looking at a big capital investment for stored water, which we'll be putting at our hospitals, but it's not going to be cheap. The second factor, these tanks are ugly. Your local community is not going to want to see them. There will be opposition to installing them, and they are a big visual representation of capital expenditure. And our hospital systems are already feeling the crunch financially, so they may not be the most, your executives might not be most excited to install one of these. The systems are complex and they're historical. The fellow and his father that we spoke about in our system here at Royal Jubilee would need to be consulted about the intricacies. Just how many thousands of liters of water are simply stored in the pipes that are required for the pressure to come to make the system function. And then finally, we are in a funding competition for all things at hospitals, including doing strategic retrofits from our side of facilities. You have to make a case for water resiliency. So this is, in my opinion, the big risk for planning for these big water outages, which is the operational versus capital funding. So the top picture there is one of our local water trucking fellows, and he will deliver you 20,000 liters of water for $300. If you look at the big tank on the bottom with the sun rising out from behind the mountains and the clouds, it's $130,000 is probably a very generous amount of money it would cost to install that. So the difference between capital and operational funding is a real threat to our response. And I would ask, if I had a metric, if a metric tool, raise your hands if you think your leaders would choose the $300 option in a pinch versus spend the big dollars right now. And most likely we're going to see people want that operational response as opposed to the capital investment. It's hard to put a KPI against it. And there's a thought that in the past, we've been able to solve our problems by spending a tremendous amount of money in the moment, as opposed to allocating our scarce resources right now. So this is the biggest risk for that obvious solution that Shaun and I have talked about, which is all roads lead to stored on-site water. I've got two quotes. One is that I've heard from different mentors in the field, but one is talking about spending money is like a KPI, preventative medicine. You can't put a KPI against it. You can't really, it's hard to make a case to prescribe exercise, healthy diets, and stress-free living to people. That has a lot of challenges around it, where if you do prescribe medication, it's a little bit easier and you can gauge recovery against that. That's the mentality that we have around operational funding. It's just easier to spend $300 or plan to spend $300 a truckload. But my questions are, where are you going to get the trucks? When water is in demand, who's going to give it to you? And if you had water and trucks, would you even be able to get the water from the source to the hospital? So in conclusion, the idea is that you should never waste a good emergency or an audit, and realistically, most places will wait till crisis has happened before they make the spending on the water tank. So facing this, Shaun and I, one of our first products we want to share with you is a water calculator. So as we went down this road, we found a lot of a lot of people holding the purse strings want to spend the operational money without any concern for its limits when the emergency happens, and that makes sense. The problem is that we do not have the trucks available or the water. The time it takes the outlets from the reservoir into the trucks, on scale, it will be challenging to support half a million liters of water. So our emergency water calculator is a complex Excel spreadsheet with a Power BI output, and it basically shows you a blue line and a red line. And when the blue line dips below the red line, your hospital, within an hour or two of that number, has run out of water. We have a resource tracker on the side where you can calculate how many truck types. So a truck type 2 has 20,000 liters of water. So you can gather all of your contractors in your own trucks, such as Brett, who has, in this model, has 100 water trailers. You can assign them and calculate realistically for your executives how many trucks is it going to take, how much money is it going to take, and then we also attached a carbon footprint to that specific daily response to recharge a system of X many liters. In addition to that, we put a slider in so that our colleagues can gauge how much water they would need to ration based on how many trucks they have available. So a few details were the truck information, the size, the speed, hospital details, locations, reservoir locations, flow rates out of the reservoirs into the trucks, flow rates from the trucks back into the hospital. My advice would be not to get too into the weeds, but and do some averages just to get a good idea of what you're dealing with. But the calculator we found was one of the best methods of articulating a really logical and fact-based response to, we'll just truck water when we run out. So this is something that you can do with your IT group. Anyone that's competent in Excel can make something like this. And then if you want to put an interface like we did, Power BI was a really good option. And then finally, our second piece, short of installing 500,000 liters of water storage on site, which in many cases could take years when you go through the capital funding, we worked with our partners at the Capital Regional District to install a hydrant bypass. So this is cost effective, and it will save you from water outages caused by the simplest of causes. So you can see on the top left, we've got the Victoria water system. Imagine that a contractor working on your site or for the municipality or for the road company makes a mistake and damages a water main, and you have lost pressure or pressure or complete loss of pressure to your facility. The simple solution is install backup water main connected to an alternate source that you can run an emergency hose into the primary inlet to your hospital. So we work together with the regional district with their integrated water services team. We installed a hydrant bypass at our Victoria General Hospital. We practiced with our teams. We practiced with the region. We made a standard operating procedure, a simple 10-step process for an emergency water loss. And then we repeated it at the other hospitals. So it was under $20,000 project to install, work together. So if we do lose water for something very simple, we would experience almost no downtime at our facilities. And then building on top of there, work together with your own teams, your local government, your water purveyor, and then install the 1 million liter tank at your site. But this is a really good first step to prevent against some really easy outages, and also tap into the local water purveyors' double layers of redundancy through multiple water mains. And that's it for us. We want to leave our presentation on a message. Some of the folks out east may be more familiar than the BC folks here about Duff Roblin and Duff's ditches. The Duff in the 60s, he spent more than Manitoba's GDP on a series of protective ditches. It was accomplished under budget and before the timeline, but eventually was voted out of office because he probably spent too much money. But in the years afterwards, and since the 1970s, It's saved about $40 billion in cumulative flood damage. So when we've been talking about our drought planning and our need for on-site storage, we've been using the Red River ditch system as the metaphor for taking bold action. Spend the money now and be prepared, because it will save you money in the long term. Shaun?
Just to hammer home the point that we should all be like Duff, he was a visionary. He saw the future. He faced the fiercest opposition, but he knew what was right. He knew it had to be done. He believed in it so strongly that he overcame all sorts of obstacles. And because he believed in what he was doing, he took it all the way to the point where it became so unpopular, he basically lost his job. He regained it in future, but he knew what was right. He's an inspiration, and we should all be like Duff.
So that's it for our presentation. But we are happy to have a discussion and learn from what you and your facilities are up to. Talk about anything about water outages and facilities. And once again, thank you for having us. But let's switch over.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I love that you finished by talking about Duff, because I lived in Manitoba for a period of time, and I feel like if I hadn't been at university there, I would not have been familiar with him as such a key example of putting the money up front. I just wanted to comment, Shaun, you said something earlier which really did stick out to me. So I feel like it is worth repeating, especially in case anybody joined even a few minutes late. So what we should do when the power goes out gets a lot of attention, but not if we can keep the taps running. And I really wanted to bring that up again, because I feel like perhaps a number of us, especially if there's older infrastructure, depending on the location of where your hospital is, maybe running on your emergency backup generators is more common. And so there's attention that's been put there, and people are sort of familiar with running on e-power. Considerations for losing full power is sort of a separate thing. But this thought of having a boil water advisory, low pressure, or losing pressure entirely does not get as much attention. And so I really appreciated that example, especially since you mentioned Halifax, but Atlanta, I think a couple of days before, also had their major water main break that impacted a couple of healthcare facilities. Halifax, Canada Day, having an issue with their water distribution system and having to go to boil water for a very large municipality. So these things happen all the time. So I really appreciate that. And somebody in the general chat had mentioned obviously competing priorities. And so one that got brought up in the chat here was talking about having dealt with particularly challenging wildfire seasons, which of course BC has had to deal with as well. Finding those sort of surplus trucks to do those loads becomes essentially impossible. And I was curious, as far as, is there weight that gets put into having certain MOUs or priority conversations? Because at the very beginning of this, you talked about having, I think, 90 different, externals that you were touching base with. So maybe you can shed a little bit of light maybe on that process.
Okay, I'd like to. So I held a flashlight for an impromptu surgeon on the outskirts of Mosul in Kurdistan to do emergency surgery to remove a projectile from a soldier's body. We overcome the fact that we were in this dark place by flicking on our headlamps. When the medic, soon to be surgeon, said, "How am I going to clean my hands?" we had no answer for him. We didn't have water. So it's just, pun intended, shines a light on the fact that, solving just one problem isn't how we need to solve this problem. If we are to be emergency managers, if we're going to face disaster realistically, we have to test our ideas. We have to think of all the human needs. And the fact that we can keep the lights on is not sufficient. We haven't played that tape to the end. We haven't gone further. again, pun, downstream on this thing to think about how we solve. Yeah, we keep the lights on, but the water running and some food, some water, some communications, all these things need to be addressed. And it can be overwhelming. And when you get overwhelmed with solving a problem, you try to solve 50, you end up solving none of them. So if you know how to keep the lights on where you work, move on to the very next basic fundamental, the water. Now, you talked about the complexity of having 90 partners on our small island. It is complex. It is labyrinthine. It's cumbersome. People want to have different agreements, and a lot of people don't want to take any responsibility. One of the things that we found is yes, we're a hospital. We are going to tend to your mother, your children, you if you're injured, but the people who are going to sign on the dotted line don't want to say you are somehow special. So our hospitals are not considered really, even though we think they should be, they are not always considered special or priority when it comes to delivering water. So we have to deal with all these partners, but the fundamentals are quite similar. We want to make an agreement to demonstrate how important the need is for everyone in the community. But then once you get into the nitty gritty of how you're going to solve this water problem, that's where it gets really individuated. That's where it becomes super specific to the point where you basically need an engineer looking over your shoulder saying, hey, Shaun, that is a really stupid idea for the following 27 reasons, even though it seemed obvious to you at first. So, on the one hand, A, think about the problem, emergency buzzword, holistically. What does a human really need? Think about all those problems. Engage all those partners first with the fundamentals in mind, and then you have to do the work of going through the tiny details that are specific. Because what we have found with this kind of complex and wicked problem, the blunt ideas are where we start. They don't translate into water coming out the end of a tap unless they're truly tested, engineered, thought out, and exercised. Does that answer any part of your question?
No, I knew it wasn't going to have a simple answer, so that's why I still wanted to put you in the hot seat. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you expanding a bit further on that, Shaun.
Yeah.
I mean, interestingly, talking about, like you said, wicked problems, somebody did put in the Q&A, and it doesn't really fall to you gentlemen in BC, but somebody was saying, you know, well, perhaps it does, but their question was targeting the GTA, was thinking about that cavalry response time for where you might be dealing with some sort of response where there are multiple hospitals all within one area. So, you know, downtown Toronto. And I think this is where perhaps like you talking about the Christchurch example is there are examples out there of where we have had to make these sort of assessments for time. And I noted to them that, you know, kind of the Northeast blackout in 2003 is a situation where we're impacting a really wide area. But certainly there are other examples. I don't know if you have any examples that you could share other than Christchurch to say these are some to look at where we've got some widespread and it helped us determine some of those time considerations. And if not, we can perhaps pose that afterwards via email, but that was something that got brought up.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to business continuity guru with the impressive beard in just a moment. But we can give you lots of examples. I can give you an example that happened 100 feet from here where someone did some plumbing, a sledge moved through a pipe, it blew out an elbow. It was a simple little thing. It took out a quarter of the hospital. And we're Herculean in our response. We react. Every plumber and carpenter, manager, eh, bottle washer, everyone rushed there, and we did everything we could to get things going. And that's what we do. But our reactivity is so good that we've overlooked proactivity in some ways. So like when we did the flood the flood algorithm here, I said, okay, we've figured out this flood algorithm. I showed it to the other FMO staff and I said, we now have to test it. And they laughed. I said, we have to do an exercise. And they laughed. I said, what are the giggles for here, guys? They said, don't worry, wait a few days. You'll have a live incident to bring this new theory to bear on. You don't have to plan anything. It's going to happen. So these things can and do happen, even if they're not in recent memory or at your particular site. So here's the question that has to be asked. Small, isolated places answer this question better. But here's what you get at big urban centers where people are highly specialized in their jobs. This is what people say. Well, this is so important. Obviously, somebody somewhere does that. That something has been looked into. I said if you pull up to a bus stop in Victoria and say to the average teenager, "Hey, do you know how much stored water this hospital has if it went out?" and the answer was zero, they just wouldn't believe you. So the idea is those people there do that. And I'm going to get everyone to ask, who are they? Who are those people? Who is the water cavalry? Because the answer you get is going to be disturbing. There aren't those people. A lot of the stuff hasn't been thought of. Eventually someone will come to your aid, but it won't be in the time frame that you want. It might not even be in the time frame that stops you from having to evacuate. So, and the other thing to think about, if this is, like you mentioned, a regional problem, it's not just your hospital. It could be the city or a portion of the city. It could be affecting 4 or 5 campuses. And just imagine that if you work where you work because you love it and you're passionate about it, this patient population is so important to you. That's your focus, your life's work. Well, everyone thinks the same way about the patients they tend to. And on the day of the race, the competition for resources is going to be extreme. And no amount of money will be spared to fix it in the emergency. But we could invest that beforehand to stop all the problems that that they cause. And I just keep going back to, what is your core mandate in hospitals? It's to provide care. It's to save people. And so when you ask, who are the people that do that? Go and ask and see what they say, and take on board their answers and realize the reality and build different, plan different, mitigate different.
To switch over to the business continuity side, like when we do these, like we're kind of in sales almost, right? And so many emergency managers probably feel that when you're looking at the mitigation side. Response, no question. Recovery is abstract and down the road. Planning is cheap, easy, and highly administrative, but mitigative is the expensive part. So when we think about RTOs and our RPOs and whatnot, we like to bring in some of the emotional quality of the argument that Shaun brings in his previous statement and tie it into that more empirical side. So the decision objective time is important. How long will it take your organization to make a decision? Should be factored in. When we do our business continuity planning, we try to tie in the concept of patient suffering, which is a really nice way to translate your recovery objective time to get back online. Is let's say it's 4 hours. How long can you go without water in your hospital? 4 hours, 8 hours. How long can people go without potable water? Like it does trigger an evacuation. If your urban hospital, urban healthcare system is overwhelmed, where are you going to put those people? And this morning we talked about vertical, horizontal evacuations. Like where are you going to put everybody? That recovery object, the 4 hour RTO is a really important one, but you can tie it to some more empathetic metrics around there. So when we look at the Capital Regional District example that I gave earlier, a really robust water system. They've had water mains break a number of times. I used to work for them. I've seen them repair water mains overnight without anyone knowing that they were hours away from losing water to hospitals, senior care homes. Like they've pulled rabbits out of hats that you wouldn't believe, but eventually you'll get an emergency that's too much. So my question to all the business continuity professionals and emergency managers is, how long can your hospital last without water? And the big vulnerability is that 0 to probably 12 hour section. And that's where you're going to be forced to make a decision about evacuating. You're going to be forced to react without a plan. So that's why we come back to the stored on-site water. 500,000 liters is our average consumption for a large hospital in Vancouver Island. And that's at zero water rationing. So in theory, any type of minor disruption, you would have 24 hours of business as usual water before the cavalry shows up, which should be the water purveyor. And assuming you have a competent local water purveyor, they'll be able to rescue that, give you prioritized service, even maybe some water rationing. So when it comes to the RTO, define what that is. How long can your system last without water? And then if you can't rely on anybody else in the Greater Toronto area to provide you with that need that you have perceived, then you got to do something yourself. There's only, the big risk is the cosmic they that everybody relies on. And Shaun, like, we are they and they are not, and we will not be there for you with anything but like a binder with a plan that says, you know, spend this much beforehand, or Google local tank vendors, right? That's kind of what you're up against. So find out your RTO for water, and then figure out what the gap is. And if somebody else isn't gonna sign on the dotted line to fill that gap, then it's up to you. Otherwise, you'll be left without water when the time comes.
So I think I'll jump in since Paul, you've been identified as the business continuity person. As you said, you didn't want to talk about water conservation. And so that didn't come up specifically in the presentation. But certainly your team has a good business continuity foundation, which supports these sort of emergency management style initiatives. But I guess perhaps if there's any advice to those on the line, I know for my own organization, we're kind of a smaller team, for example, and there's a lot of sort of community hospitals or individual hospitals that aren't a part of a larger network that struggle with the business continuity side of things, is to try and figure out the discussions around getting those numbers where you're saying you need to find out how much water you need. So kind of in that water calculator and so on, is clearly you have some sort of program in place that helped you get to those numbers in the first place. So any tips?
It has, and my advice has nothing to do about hospitals specifically. Business continuity is a highly administrative and incredibly vulnerable social activity where you go to another agency, another group of people that may not know you, trust you, and you get them to spill the details. Everything that they use cash, dumb, stupid luck, and charisma to overcome must be uncovered, documented, and then sent up to somebody in charge with signing authority and accountability to action. And that's a huge ask. So I wouldn't say that we have a great business continuity program. And I think most public organizations wouldn't either, unless you need business continuity for some ISO, unless it's something that gets cut, right? It's not on the front of people's mind. It takes time. And let's just think of all the close calls we've had that some business continuity would help. So that's my first take, is business continuity is a very like empathetic, trust-based social activity. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I remember in one previous career getting my boss and then her boss both left the organization. And then I was reporting to the CEO, who was a bit of a micromanager. And all of a sudden, no one wanted to talk to me about their business continuity plans, right? So that would be my take, is if you are going to have a business continuity program, don't hire a contractor, have it in-house, somebody that's on the team, have an executive that is going to champion it, make it like an after action debrief where there's no judgment attached and you do get the information out. And sometimes you have to have uncomfortable conversations. But for us, it was really how long can you last without water? And the sites that said, well, we have 800 liters of emergency canned water. They're a little bit easier to start to get those hard numbers. So if you like, they've gone through the thought process, whereas other facilities that don't have any investment in canned water, you say, well, how long can you last without water? They might not know, and you have to break down some of the assumptions, which is that water will be trucked, the helicopter will show up, the local government will respond. So I don't have any good answers for you about hospitals and business continuity, except that it's such an important activity, but it's highly administrative and detested, and you might uncover a lot of things that many people would wish was never documented. So good luck. But do not discount its importance. BC, we're going to have it legislated for not only public sector but private sector, so we'll see a lot of change coming. I have no idea how that's going to unfold because, yeah, like we do. I always say cash, charisma, dumb, stupid luck. That is kind of the big three.
I appreciate the candidness.
If I may, can I further demoralize you with reality? So nobody knows your business like you do. When you hire a consultant, here's what happens. You bring them in, you teach them a language in which to speak to them in. You're better off just talking to the people in your organization that already speak your language. But what you have to do is you have to get people to literally expose themselves. You have to say what we haven't done. You have to bring your dirt up into the sunlight. And there's a lot of leadership levels who are not motivated to do so. So when Paul talks about charisma, one of the things we've used is we start communicating very differently. We don't say, hi, we're the emergency management program. We come in and we say, we are the Armageddon Roadshow. We are going to scare you to death about all the stuff that's coming at you in order of what's most likely and most catastrophic. And we're going to try and shame you into spending your own money in making sure you're a duff, you're a hero, and you don't end up like a zero. So if that sounds unprofessional, it is, because when we went in there all polite and polished, it went over their heads. But you go in there like you're announcing a monster truck show as the Armageddon Roadshow. When you're screaming into the hurricane, people do start to listen. And you're like an internal consultant. You're advising people to spend their money on something they don't want to spend it on for a future maybe what if, when in healthcare, today is the emergency. So uphill battle, yeah, but someone's got to do it. Why shouldn't it be you? Be a duff.
Ooh, it's good, Shaun. So I was going to say it's very much a presentation that I'm glad is recorded because I'm sure a number of folks in attendance appreciate from, yes, an emergency management lens, having the series available. But the initial intent with this series was also to be able to have these captured so that our organizational leaders have the ability to review this content also. As well as different community partners. So kind of making these things very clear. I think this captures a lot of those elements, including obviously this was that facilities side, which is really giving, you know, sort of one particular focus that we don't give a lot of attention to, or at least we haven't so far. In this series. So I really want to thank you for bringing this forward, what you've been doing in your own organization, for the candidness with which you brought the message forward. I know there were a lot of comments in kind of the chat, but we didn't have very many that actually came through the Q&A. So I feel as though you articulated your message very well, and we didn't have a lot of outstanding items that folks thought, "This, I want to know more about this." So you can commend yourselves for a great talk. I don't see anything else. There was one piece that somebody was kind of highlighting, which really isn't a question, but it's more that sad piece of NIMBY that Paul had mentioned, where not every hospital ends up having this space to have some sort of water tank installed. But even then, I would say my own hospital is having an expansion and we're taking over part of the parking lot. So where there's a will, there's a way. And so maybe I would say that as one point, but I'll say, Shaun, Paul, any last thoughts before we close out the session today that you would like to raise?
Yeah, just be like Duff, take initiative, and yeah, it is an uphill battle for emergency managers, and it is a noble profession, especially in the healthcare context. So I commend all of you for your choice in career, and it is a noble pursuit. So well done, everyone.
Yeah, just be brave. You'll be an unsung hero, but you will still be a hero, and that's a choice.
Shaun, Paul, thank you so much. As I mentioned, you're the first speakers we've had from the West Coast. It's the first time we've heard anybody touch on, you know, earthquake and tsunami concerns, just kind of lightly peppered in there on your one slide. Really, really grateful to have your perspectives shared with us today. And again, as I said, just by the fact that we didn't get questions I think really does highlight how prime of a message this is, especially with everything we've seen in the news. And I know I'll be going back to review this recording myself. I turn it over to Francesco to do the official sign off since we've hit that 1 hour mark.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'd just like to quickly echo my thanks to both of you, Shaun and Paul. There's a great presentation. Really interesting. I learned a lot, and I see in the chat people are saying that they've also taken a lot away from this presentation. So thank you so much. Really interesting topic, and really interesting to see how this is going to develop with more climate change and unfortunately probably more disasters that will affect water supply. So yeah, thank you so much. That was a great talk. Um, Thank you for interacting with the audience and for answering the questions. Thank you, as always, Misha, for helping put together this session and for supporting the series since it started last year. So thank you so much for all of your support. And of course, thank you to everybody in the audience for taking the time to be here, asking questions, participating. We put these sessions on for all of you who attend. So it means a lot that everybody is constantly signing on and following the series. So with that, I just want to remind everybody, this is a recorded session. I have put all of our socials in the chat along with our YouTube channel where the session will be uploaded within the next few hours. Um, and this is also just a reminder, it is a monthly series, but we are taking 2 months off for the summer, so we will be back in October. No new registrations are needed, so just follow us on our social media or check the event page, and we'll be back on the first Wednesday of October with our next session to finish off this series, October and November for this year. So with that, just one last big thank you to everybody. I hope everybody has a great couple of months, and we'll see you all when we're back in October.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.